What's the greatest challenge facing humanity today? The greatest challenge facing humanity is that we don't have a challenge. Okay, so that's not entirely true. There are plenty of challenges before us. We have the climate crisis, we have weapons of mass destruction, we have to end poverty, there's still domestic violence. Each of these is a most worthy challenge for humanity to take on and solve in and of itself. So the challenge actually is that we haven't got a grand narrative, a meta-narrative, a big story that unites all of these things, that provides a coherent, universal or nearly universal, compelling story that brings us all into it so that we can take on the smaller challenges, big as they are, that are before us. And from the time of Jesus until a couple of decades ago, the phenomenon of Christendom was infusing the world with its meta-narrative, which went like this. God created us and the world and saw that it was good, very good in fact. But then, perhaps through hubris, we turned away from God and thought we could go it alone. And we struggled to reconcile with God what had happened. We tried to be one again, but had a hard time doing it. And then Jesus embodied this reconciliation that we were seeking, and put the onus on us to live as benevolently as possible, to live with empathy and to care for each other. And then when all was set right, and all is as it should be, the kingdom of God would be fulfilled, and Jesus would be living with us again, until the end of all things, known as the Theeschaton. And it's not a bad story, really. I mean, it's got plot, setting, characters, everyone had a mission. And because the story was so compelling, it spread, and spread pretty fast. But eventually it spread dependent on violence and colonialism, and things couldn't continue in that way. And so it came undone. And maybe it came undone because we couldn't agree on the big things, like, did Jesus reconcile all of us to God or just some? Or is it okay to kill people who are doing terrible things even though we are to love our enemies? Maybe it came apart because of smaller things like day-to-day choices or sexuality. Or maybe the whole narrative fell apart because the human instinct for accumulation, both in terms of power and wealth, was just incongruent with a narrative of benevolence and trust and generosity. And so a new one replaced it, a new narrative that justified ecological destruction, entrenched poverty, separation along the lines of gender, race, class, sexuality. And then ultimately we became anxious and depressed. We know that the current narrative is broken, but going back doesn't seem like an option. There's only forward. And so we're ready for a new narrative. And this new narrative goes a little something like this. Through seemingly impossible coincidences that seemed miraculous, we and all that is came into being. And with that came an invitation to create new life. Some call this invitation God.
And our task is to create the circumstances in which new life can arise. Protecting ecosystems, for example. We find ways to minimize destruction while maximizing creation.
And so this is what I'm asking. Will you see yourself as part of that new story, as a partner in creating new life? In this new narrative, there is no us and them. All species are connected with God as one, in abundance and trust, generosity, so that there is always new life in the making.